Chris Blevins. I'm with the Wise News. I have put together a series of interviews of people who knew or were involved with Clifton Branham, a notorious outlaw of the Appalachian Mountains of southwest Virginia and eastern Kentucky. These interviews took place in 1904 to 1905. I endeavored to contact as many as I could who Clifton mentioned in his confession, and others who were referred by these people who witnessed the life of Clifton. I made a stop in Johnson County, Kentucky to speak with Clifton's oldest brother, Joseph. He shared insights into Clifton's early life and marriage and his propensity for finding trouble. I also stopped in Letcher County to visit with Richard Branham, another brother of Clifton. He seemed to have sound advice for Clifton, which, in keeping with his character, he refused to listen to.
Clifton was just a baby when Pa, Richard, and me went off to war. Ma took Richard and me over into Virginia from Dorton to an army camp to sign us up. We was just kids ourselves. Ma was afraid that the snipers would pick us off if we stayed with her and the rest of the kids. I had an older sister, Betty, who was already married and gone, but there was still 6 of us at home when Pa joined up. I reckon that Ma was also concerned on how she was going to feed all of us until Pa got back too. Anyways, it made perfect sense that the army would be better protection for us under the circumstances. Soldiers would come and take what food we had anyways. Me and Richard were only gone about 2 years afore the war was done. When it was over, we made our way back to Elkhorn, where Ma had moved. A short time later, Pa came back too, but nobody recognized him. He was pitiful looking, skinny as a rail and all. Anyways, I stayed with them and helped Pa with the gardening, and we built a cabin over on a piece of land that he bought on the Owl Branch just in Kentucky. Clifton was now about 7 or 8 when we got it done, and my baby sister, Polly, was born and growing like a weed. Clifton and my brother Tandy were always finding trouble. Mostly Tandy, but Clifton was following him pretty close. I decided that I did not want to live around that kind of trouble, as I had seen enough of the killing and bad things that men do to one another in the war. My sister Betty had moved over to Johnson County, which was near 80 miles away. In 1869, I decided that I would go over there too, and see if I could start a fresh life away from the problems caused by Tandy and Clifton. It was quite a tough trip, but I managed to make it and found work. I fell in love with a young lady named Exer. We got married and were living a peaceful, happy life raising our kids. I was determined to be a good citizen and help whoever I could along the way. Then Clifton came over and wanted to live here, but I could already see that he was following Tandy's example, and trouble would find him quick. He decided to stay with Betty, who didn't know him like I did. Sure enough, it was hardly no time before he was into it. He got the idea in his head that 2 Fleming people didn't deserve to live because he thought they were abusing Betty. He took pot shots at them on separate occasions, but fortunately didn't hit them. He was just 14 and already of a mind that he'd be justified killing someone if he decided to. He stayed there a couple more years before trouble was catching up to him, and I think he knowed it. He went back to Virginia. Now, barely 16, he went by Cousin Martin Branham's on the Pound River. There he found that Pa had moved the family to the Cumberland Mountain. He hired himself out to Elizabeth Branham to help on her farm. Tandy Branham, her husband, had been killed by Union sympathizers in the war, and she had 2 boys and 1 girl still at home. Clifton had his eyes on the girl. He only worked for her a month to get the crops in, but that was more than long enough for him to steal the girl away and run off to Pa. Elizabeth said she would never give Nancy up to marry him, but after nearly 2 years, I guess she figured it was no use and gave in. They lived with Pa for a time. Their first child was born there, but Clifton wasn't one to stay put for very long. He came back over here in Johnson County from time to time, and I'd see him, but I could tell he was not doing right. He seemed to find the wrong people to work for and hang around with. They had 4 children over the first 8 years, but he never seemed to be comfortable with a settled life, always on the move, especially after their second child died. He was rumored to be involved with feuds and clan things, but I can't say that for sure. Like I said, he always seemed to find trouble. Then in 1887, old Henry Vanover got killed. Clifton, Tandy, and George Johnson were blamed. Clifton showed up at Betty's again on the run, and that's where the law caught him and took him in. Tandy was caught shortly afterwards and brought in. I heard George had got waylaid and killed, so they didn't get him to trial. Clifton and Tandy were found guilty and given life sentences in the pen. Such a wasted life, both of them. Richard came by one time on his way to see them in the pen and asked if I wanted to go. I told him I didn't. I had things to do on the farm. I don't think they would listen to me no more now than they had years ago. They was where they was supposed to be, and I couldn't help them. Richard came back by on his way back and said that Clifton had found the Lord and gone to preaching in the pen. Richard said he seemed to be a changed man. I said that was a good thing. I hoped he had made his peace. We found out that Tandy didn't do well in the pen. They said he went plumb crazy. They sent him off to the asylum in eastern Kentucky. After he was there a spell, he got well and they let him go. He ended up in a fight with a young feller and got himself killed in 1896. Seems like it was just a few years later I hear Clifton Dunn got a parole from the governor because of his good doings. I only wish that it had lasted, because it was no time at all before he was back in trouble again for killing Nancy. Then he came over here to Floyd County and killed another man. He got caught in White House and was taken back to Wise County for trial. They found him guilty and this time sentenced him to hang. Like I said, it seems like such a wasted life. He made a lot of bad choices, but they was his to make and his to bear the consequences of. My baby sister, Polly, stood by him to the end. I guess she never saw him for what he was either. Just sad, so sad indeed.
Clifton and Tandy were always finding trouble. I believe that Tandy led him astray at an early age. Joe and me got back from the war. We stayed with Pa for a spell to help him get things going again. The war had pretty much cleaned out the county. People was trying to start over again everywhere. Tandy didn't help much, and Clifton was really no help. He was just a young'un with no sense at all. Joe and me helped Pa start his cabin over on the Owl Branch, and when him and Clifton moved in it, I took off. I had to get away from all the trouble my brothers were kicking up. 'Twarn't no time before Joe lit out too. I knowed there was going to be trouble. I went to 3 Mile on Shelby Creek and started my life over. I got married and started a family of my own. A few years later, Clifton came by and said he was going to Johnson County 'cause Pa wasn't doing him right. He had heard that Joe had gone there, and we had a sister Betty, who lived there too. I didn't see him much after that. Next thing I knowed, he done run off with Nancy and got married. He was always on the move, never settled down much. He was just like Tandy, always finding trouble. Next time I saw him, he was on his way back to Betty's, on the run I guess. Word came back that he was arrested for killing Henry Vanover. Sure, I went to their trial. They was my brothers. It was made known at the trial that both of them had confessed and said that George Johnson had actually done the killing. The prosecutor said that was easy for them to say. He said that they knew that George had already been killed and couldn't defend himself. He also pointed out that they was all in it together, so it didn't really matter who pulled the trigger. They all got the money for it. They was both lucky they didn't get the rope. He and Tandy got life sentences in the pen. I went to see him there a couple of times. He seemed like a different person when I saw him the second time. He sent word for me to come again after he had been there nearly 14 years. He said Kentucky had passed a parole law that he maybe could get if I'd speak for him. Being a veteran and all, things being the way they were at that time with all the killing and things going on, I told him to stay where he was. He'd live a lot longer. Besides, he was doing the Lord's work there. He didn't like what I told him and went to talking with cripple Billy Fleming, his brother-in-law. The deputy warden and Billy recommended him to the board. The governor gave him a parole. Clifton went back to Virginia and got into it with Dave Fleming and killed Nan. He came by here after he had done the deed and brung Lizzie with him. He told me to raise her. She had no mother and he was on the run. I really had no choice. 'Twarn't no time before my son Richard said he was in love with the girl and wanted to marry her. I didn't see nothing wrong with it. Clifton went on over to Floyd County and killed another feller afore they caught up with him They took him to Wise and ended up hanging him. Turned out that what I told him came to pass. He sure didn't live long on the outside.
In Dickinson County, Virginia, I interviewed Clifton's brother-in-law, William Fleming. William had a key role in obtaining the conditional pardon. He tells of the events leading up to the murder of Nancy and attempted murder of Dave Fleming.
I'm William J. Fleming, Clifton's brother-in-law. I was a school teacher and sometimes deputy in Wise County. I met Clifton not long after he married Nan. He was not a very good man then. He seemed to be prone for trouble. Got involved in a killing and sent to prison for life in Kentucky. Clifton was a changed man in prison. The deputy warden and me went before the parole board on his behalf. He had been preaching and praying daily for over 14 years, setting a fine example for his fellow prisoners. They agreed and petitioned the governor for a pardon. When he got home, things went well at first. Then he sent for the family, and Lizzie was the first to come to see him while we were at Whip Branham's. Lizzie told Clifton of things going on between her and Dave Fleming, Ida's husband. It was a lot for Clifton to grasp, and it set him back quite a bit. I didn't have any use for Dave Fleming. Right after he married Clifton's oldest daughter, he got into a fight with my son Tandy and nearly killed him. It was all over Ida's gossiping about the family. Patsy's sister Nan had been in a hard place while Clifton was in prison, and I guess she did her best. After Nan, Dave, and Ida got there, Nan came into the house, but Dave and Ida stayed out by the road. Clifton confronted Nan about the goings-on between Dave and Liz. Nan wanted Clifton to come home with them. Clifton refused. He told Nan that he would finish raising Liz to get her away from Dave. Nan denied nothing of the accusation, and I think they were fixing to leave as it was getting late in the afternoon. Ida came in then and asked Clifton to come out by the road because Dave wanted to see him. Nan asked him to go, but me and Patsy didn't think it a good idea. Dave was no good. When Clifton would not go, they all left except Liz, and it was clear that they were not there for any good purpose. I'd say this was the real turning point in Clifton's life after getting paroled. 3 days before Christmas, the bad blood between Dave and Clifton erupted, resulting in Dave getting shot. Although it was not a serious wound, he would carry the scar on his forehead the rest of his life. It would, however, lead to the killing of Nan just a few minutes later when she accused Clifton of improper relations with Liz. He left her lying in the road and took Liz over into Kentucky. He left her there with his brother Richard and was on the run. Stories have come back about him killing a man named Ance Moore. They caught him in White House trying to catch a train out west. Brought him back to Wise for trial for Nan's killing. He's said to be the last man to hang in Wise County.
I interviewed Deputy Warden Harve Martin at the Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville after Clifton had been pardoned from serving a life sentence in 1902. He recalled him to be a model prisoner while there. Here is his recollections.
Oh, yeah, I remember Clifton Branham. He and his brother Tandy came in here with life sentences in 1887. They had been involved with the killing of Henry Vanover in Letcher County. Tandy didn't last long. He started going crazy after a few years. He was doing insane things, acting like a cow, sometimes getting down and eating grass and crawling around on all fours like an animal. He took to hitting himself in the head and making strange sounds. We finally had a doctor take a look at him, and the doc said he needed to go to the asylum, so he got committed. Don't really know what happened to him. Clifton, on the other hand, got a Bible from the library and got involved with the Royal Christian Brotherhood and joined the Sunday school class with them. He was a model prisoner. It wasn't long before he was praying in the yard and then preaching from the Bible to anyone who would listen. Some of the men made fun of him, but that didn't stop him. He kept right on preaching and praying. Some of the men did get converted and joined the Brotherhood with him. He was doing a good work and setting a great example for the new inmates as well as those who were already here. He did this for over 10 years that I know of. I watched him closely, and he never deviated from this practice in all that time. The parole law came into effect in January 1902. Clifton's brother-in-law, William J. Fleming, paid him regular visits every couple of months, and he came to me and asked me about the parole law and if I thought Clifton might be a candidate. It was plain to see that he was a changed man. And from my witnessing of his life for almost 14 years now, I told him that I thought so. We started working on getting him a parole hearing. It took a few months to arrange it, but when he went before the parole board, he convinced them that he had seen the error of his ways and that he wished he could have seen this before he got involved with the bad things that he had done. When he had finished speaking with them, the board asked for character witnesses, and William Fleming and I spoke on his behalf and testified to the changed nature of this man. The board recommended him for the parole under the new statute, and the governor granted him a conditional pardon. He was a free man after 14 years and 7 months at Eddyville prison.
In Frankfort, Kentucky, I spoke with Governor Beckham. He was forthcoming with his reasoning on the conditional pardon for Clifton.
I remember Clifton Branham because he was one of the first to be recommended by the parole board because of his record of being an exemplary prisoner for over 14 years. He also had the backing of the deputy warden there in Eddyville. His brother-in-law also made a great case for his release. It was in June 1903 when I received a petition from the governor of Virginia requesting his extradition back to Virginia to stand trial for the murder of his wife. I was also informed he was wanted for a murder in Floyd County of Anderson Moore. Given his past record, I sent him back. I believe it was the right choice. Virginia had a death sentence, and this man had been given a golden opportunity to make good on starting over, and he was allegedly guilty of 2 more murders in the short time he was out. I feel bad for the families of the victims, but I thought it was a right decision.
I have more interviews coming soon. The series on Clifton Branham will continue. I'm Chris Blevins for the Wise News.